I want to talk with you this morning about following the sign to Jesus. The wine miracle told in John 2 is a story about a sign, one of many. A sign that points us to a glorious and beautiful truth about Jesus. He's the Messiah, the Son of God. However, not all signs are easy to follow. Some signs steer us along difficult paths. For example, consider the sign that points to the Tiger's Nest Monastery in the Himalayas. Constructed around the cave in which a revered Buddhist monk once meditated, this monastery is one of the most beautiful and sacred sites in that region. But getting there to witness this beauty is no easy task because it was built on the side of a mountain. Scaling to this precarious perch, devoted Buddhists fearlessly ascend 3,000 feet along a path that becomes increasingly vertical. And the latter part of the climb is made via a bare skeleton of a stairway. No handrails, just eroded steps carved long ago into the face of that cliff. It's a difficult road to take. Likewise, following the signs that lead us to a recognition and acceptance of Jesus as God is not always easy. Because often those signs mean traveling roads paved with heavy truths. Truths that challenge us to respect the sovereignty of God, trust in His sufficiency, and recognize that He is the source of every blessing. These too can be dangerous roads. I hope to illustrate that as we engage this popular miracle. Our story picks up after Jesus and a handful of disciples have traveled up from the southern end of the Jordan River. Jesus has returned to the region of Galilee, where his hometown of Nazareth is placed, only to find his mother present at a wedding banquet in the neighboring village of Cana. Jesus, party of six, is subsequently invited to join the celebratory feast. It's not an invitation they would refuse. After all, ain't no party like a Jewish wedding party because a Jewish wedding party don't stop. In all seriousness, the wedding banquet, the party was an extended, often week-long celebration, which served as the climax of the marriage ritual. It is a major community event that most would be eager to attend. Once at the banquet, Jesus and his followers enter an atmosphere pulsing with jubilance. Joy sweeps throughout the room on the acoustics of song, and merriment is carried by the constant flow of wine. All is well. That is, until the wine runs out. Then, on cue, the servants are huddled, straining to keep their bickering from rising above a whisper. Maybe one of them is pointing a finger at Jesus' entourage, noting that none of them was originally on the guest list, but that hasn't stopped them from having their fill. Appreciating in what world this could possibly constitute any sort of crisis requires some familiarity not only with Jewish weddings, but also Jewish culture. Wine isn't just a casual beverage choice, it's a drink held in high esteem, seen as inherently blessed, as well as instrumental in the invocation of blessing. Not to mention, inviting guests into your home for a feast, then failing to adequately provide for them would be disgraceful. It would violate the unwritten, but no less sacred and ingrained laws of hospitality. And it would tarnish the honor of the groom and his family, who would ultimately be held responsible. So you can imagine the nervousness, the fear of embarrassment to be experienced when guests are left to murmur awkwardly over empty cups. Hoping to avoid a dampening of the festive spirit and the dulling of a family's honor, Mary alerts Jesus. Her report is short, perhaps to preserve discretion, but it's pregnant with expectation. They have no wine. Translation, Jesus, do something. However, implicitly, Mary is telling Jesus to do something because she believes that he can do something. The expectant nature of her statement is established by the maternal connection to Jesus. For Mary, the true, albeit dormant capability of Christ is rooted in the most intimate of memories, his immaculate conception in childhood. Perhaps still fresh on Mary's mind is Luke's description of an angelic greeting by Gabriel, who announced that she would conceive a son. But he won't be the natural product of a marital union. He'll be the genuine progeny of God's Spirit. Perhaps still clear in Mary's memory is a group of shepherds arriving at the birthplace of Jesus in Bethlehem and listening in awe as they tell her their story. How while tending their sheep in the night, they suddenly became an audience to a heavenly herald and host, one announcing the birth of the Messiah, the other praising God and speaking goodwill toward men. And as a mother, Mary will not have forgotten that one Passover when young Jesus postpones the journey home in order to pontificate with religious teachers in the temple. Mary has treasured all these things in her heart as assurances that Jesus is capable of great things, that he will perform awesome works, that he is no mere man. It's a twist then when all of these assurances collide head-on with a seemingly disinterested Jesus. In fact, Jesus' reply is outright odd and uncharacteristic, considering what we know about him. The Son of God talking back to his mother? Somebody break out the popcorn. Commentaries are replete with efforts to make sense of his mysterious response and soften its hardness. What does he mean by hour? Is he referring to his future and inevitable crucifixion? Or is it more simply a reference to the inauguration of his public ministry? In either case, why the resistance? While the answers differ, any reader will agree that by raising the question of timing, Jesus is not giving Mary the definite affirmation of assistance she was expecting. And maybe that's the point. In questioning Mary's expectation that he do something, Jesus is asserting his own authority, his sovereignty, in the face of her demanding faith. It's an idea Eugene Patterson, author of the Message Bible, captured best when he paraphrased Jesus' response as, "Don't push me." It's the idea that in the wake of big faith, big expectations can threaten to push divine will and sovereignty out of the equation. There's a dangerous possibility that earnest faith can develop into an extreme that makes little to no allowance for divine discretion, God's right to do what he wants, to act according to his own good judgment. It is possible that we can become so inflexible, so unwilling to bend to God's will, that instead we insist on bending God. We tell God what to do, then when and how to do it. There's a naval urban legend that rather humorously illustrates the danger of such inflexibility. A U.S. Navy carrier is traveling in coastal waters when its crew receives a transmission requesting that the carrier change course in order to avoid a collision. The captain of the carrier recommends that the other party change its course, but they repeatedly insist that this is not possible. Exasperated and annoyed, the captain angrily states his rank and the class of his ship, then once again demands that the other party change course, to which they simply reply, "This is a lighthouse, your call." For the sake of clarification, Jesus is like that lighthouse. He is the fixed source of our direction. He's not subject to our direction. Our faith, no matter how earnest or sincere, cannot supersede the sovereignty of God. Our faith is never so powerful, and we are never so important that we can force or order the hand of God. Isaiah 40, verses 13 through 14, rhetorically asks, "Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord? Or as his counselor has informed him? With whom did he consult, and who gave him understanding? And who taught him in the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and informed him of the way of understanding?" As exciting and empowering as it may be these days to declare and decree every good thing under the sun, the reality is that even great faith must submit to the greater sovereignty of God. Fortunately, Mary doesn't retreat from Jesus' assertion of sovereignty. She doesn't accuse him of being slow and apathetic. She doesn't assume a disgruntled and disappointed posture. Instead, she persists in her faith, believing that whatever Jesus decides to do will be appropriate. This internal commitment is even built into the language of her instruction to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Whatever is an important qualification that will reprise its significance when Jesus takes action. Present at the banquet are large stone pots containing water. These are commonly seen instruments used to satisfy a basic Jewish ritual, hand washing. Also present are servants, persons of little regard, charged with attending to the dining guests. Imagine the curiosity and skepticism Jesus inspires when he begins working out the wine dilemma, not with an overt flash of supernatural energy, but by enlisting dutiful servants and dull stone, common people and common pots. But in doing so, Jesus demonstrates that he is sufficient, that in his proficient hands, what is common can be used to produce something commendable, and what is of little regard can be used to produce something remarkable. We see this type of transformation several times in the gospel. In the feeding of the multitude, John chapter 6 shows us that in the hands of Jesus, a lad's lunch of 5 barley loaves and 2 fish becomes an all-you-can-eat buffet with takeout. In the healing of the blind man, John chapter 9 shows us that with the spit of Jesus, trampled dirt off the streets of Jerusalem becomes the balm of Gilead. And here in John chapter 2, we see that under the supervision of Jesus, stagnant water becomes stellar wine. Jesus is sufficient, and if you trust him with whatever you have, he can make whatever you need. It's almost sad that the story doesn't end with Jesus being hoisted onto human shoulders. In a stroke of dramatic irony, the disciples watch as the wine is tasted, then the bridegroom is called out and commended. But it's only if the significance of verse 11 and his disciples believe in him, it's only if the significance of that verse is overlooked that the discrediting of Jesus appears to be a loss. In the resonance of that verse, I'm left with the impression that here Jesus isn't concerned about public recognition, but private faith. If he was concerned about public recognition, he would have performed the miracle in such a way that his role would have been unmistakable. But his intent was for his disciples to see that he was the source and the Son of God. Wouldn't it be wonderful if everyone recognized God as the source of miraculous power and blessings? But the reality is many people, prideful and self-assured, will go their lives attributing the success they experience and the blessings they enjoy all to their hard work, their great education, their likable personality. But I've come to tell you that if you're a disciple of Christ and a child of God, if you've lived in the shadow of his presence, if you've enjoyed the effects of his providence, if you've submitted to his sovereignty and trusted in his sufficiency, then you ought to know him as the source. Not just as the source of new wine, but the source of every good and perfect gift. The source of every sunrise and sunset. The source of every budding flower and singing bird. Jesus is the source of a grace that passes all comprehension, a love that exceeds every dimension, and of a life that escapes sinful condition. Friends, follow the sign to Jesus. No matter how hard it is to submit your will to his own, no matter how hard it is to trust his sufficiency when resources are inadequate, no matter how hard it is to resist pride and see him as the source of your success, friends, follow the sign to Jesus, to life, eternal life, and to God. Amen.